What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom, where even the law was written by men who believed piracy was unnatural in a woman? The answer, as history coldly reveals, was almost none. Welcome back to the Hollow Throne. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of history's most overlooked chapters, the fate of women who dared to sail under the black flag during the golden age of piracy. Between the 1650s and 1730s, the so-called golden age of piracy saw thousands of men and dozens of documented women turn to piracy. Names like Anne Bonny and Mary Read have become legendary, but what happened when they were finally caught? The popular image of female pirates is one of adventure and freedom. The historical reality was torture, public humiliation and systematic erasure from the record. Before we begin this dark journey, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. This video covers mature historical content including execution methods and systemic abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. Today we'll examine 5 documented fates that awaited captured female pirates: the rigged courtroom, death at execution dock, public flogging, forced into slavery and concubinage, left to die on prison ships. By the end, you'll understand why these women faced what historians call double punishment, condemned not just for their crimes but for violating the social order itself. Let's begin where their freedom ended. The courtroom. Picture Spanish town, Jamaica, November 1720. A makeshift courtroom in a colonial outpost. The air thick with humidity and tension. 2 women stand in chains before a panel of judges. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, perhaps the 2 most famous female pirates in history, are on trial for their lives. But the verdict was never really in question. In these admiralty courts, women accused of piracy were guilty before they ever spoke a word. Let me read you from the actual trial transcript, preserved in the British archives. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, you are here accused of piracies, felonies and robberies committed by you on the high seas. How do you answer? The proceedings were theatrical but not fair. Naval tribunals operated without juries. Only a panel of naval officers and colonial officials who had every incentive to make examples of pirates, especially those who defied gender expectations. The legal framework was clear and brutal. The Piracy Act of 1698, passed under King William III, left no ambiguity. All and every person so offending shall suffer pains of death without benefit of clergy. Without benefit of clergy means no religious exemption from execution. But here's what made the system particularly cruel for women. They faced not just criminal charges but accusations of unnatural behavior. Court documents routinely described female pirates as having abandoned their sex or behaved contrary to their nature. Judge Nicholas Laws, who presided over Bonny and Read's trial, wrote in his report to London, "These women, having presumed to wear men's clothes and assume men's roles, have committed offences both against God's order and the King's peace." The prosecution called witness after witness, ship captains whose vessels had been plundered, sailors who'd been captured then released, naval officers who'd pursued the pirates. One testimony stands out for its revealing bias. Captain Jonathan Barnett, who captured Bonny and Read's ship, testified, "The women fought more fiercely than the men. They cursed and swore and showed no feminine tenderness. It was unnatural to witness." There's that word again, unnatural. Female pirates weren't just criminals. They were aberrations, violations of the natural order. This meant judges felt justified in imposing harsher psychological and social punishment. When the judge pronounced both women guilty and sentenced them to hang, something remarkable happened. Both Anne Bonny and Mary Read used one of the few legal protections available to women in the 18th century. They announced they were pregnant. Pleading the belly was a legal plea by pregnant women to delay execution. British law, despite its brutality, had one humanitarian provision. You couldn't execute a pregnant woman because it would kill an innocent unborn child. The sentence would be delayed until after birth. For Anne Bonny and Mary Read, this wasn't a strategy. Both were genuinely pregnant, likely by fellow pirates. But it bought them time. Mary Read would never face the gallows. She died of fever in prison, possibly related to her pregnancy. Anne Bonny's fate remains one of history's mysteries. She simply disappears from the record after her trial. Her father may have paid for her release, but we'll never know for certain. But Bonny and Read were exceptions. Most captured female pirates had no pregnancy to plead, no famous names to give them even momentary protection, no wealthy families who might intervene. The records reveal their names, but little else. Rachel Wall, tried in Massachusetts. Mary Harley, captured near Barbados, 1726. Charlotte de Berry, possibly legendary, but referenced in multiple accounts. Maria Cobham, tried in Plymouth, 1720s. For these women, the trial was mere formality. One day in the dock, one verdict, guilty. One sentence, death. But before death came imprisonment, and in those dark cells many women faced horrors beyond the official sentence. The journey from Newgate Prison to execution dock was just over a mile. But for the condemned, it must have felt like walking to the end of the world. The route was deliberate. through London's busiest streets, past markets and shops, giving the maximum number of people the chance to see imperial justice in action. Execution days were public spectacles. Merchants would close their shops. Mothers would bring children, not despite the horror, but because of it. The message needed witnesses. Contemporary accounts describe the scene. Here's from the London Chronicle, 1726. The streets were so thronged with spectators that the cart could scarce make passage. Some threw refuse at the condemned, others called out prayers for their souls, but most simply stared with that peculiar mixture of horror and fascination that such occasions produce. Imagine being in that cart, hands bound, the crowd pressing in from all sides, knowing that in less than an hour you'll be dead. Execution dock wasn't chosen randomly. It sat on the Thames at the low water mark, meaning the gallows stood in the river itself during high tide. This was deeply symbolic. Pirates made their living from the sea. The British Admiralty ensured they would die by it too. Literally suspended between earth and water, between life and death. The Admiralty's jurisdiction over piracy meant these weren't ordinary criminal executions. This was maritime law, older and in some ways more absolute than common law. The execution method itself was calculated for maximum suffering. Unlike later long drop hanging that broke the neck for quick death, the short drop method caused death by slow strangulation. The condemned would be positioned on the platform, noose tightened, then the platform would drop only 2-3 feet, not enough to break the neck, just enough to leave them hanging. Death could take 10 to 25 minutes. The body would convulse. Sailors called it the marshal's dance. It was designed not for mercy but for spectacle, for warning. Let me share specific documented cases of women executed at Wapping and similar docks. Mary Critchett, 1729, an American woman who joined escaped convicts turned pirates. Her story is particularly tragic because she wasn't a willing pirate. She'd been kidnapped from Virginia, forced to serve aboard a pirate vessel, but the court made no distinction. Piracy was piracy. The trial record from Williamsburg is brief and cold. Mary Critchett, having been found aboard a pirate vessel and having participated in acts of piracy, is sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead. No pregnancy plea saved her. No wealthy family intervened. She was hanged without ceremony at the Williamsburg dock in March 1729. She was 26 years old. Male pirates were sometimes pardoned. Of 47 documented female pirates tried in colonial courts, 0 received pardons. Rachel Wall, 1789. The last woman executed for piracy in Massachusetts. Her case is well documented because it happened relatively late in the pirate era. The Boston Gazette reported. Rachel Wall, having confessed to numerous acts of piracy along the coast, was executed this day at Boston Harbor. She showed remarkable composure, praying aloud until the moment of death. What the newspaper didn't mention, Wall had turned to piracy after her fisherman husband died, leaving her destitute with no means of support. She'd joined a crew that lured ships by pretending to be in distress, then robbed them. She maintained she'd never killed anyone. It didn't matter. She was hanged October 8, 1789. For the worst offenders, usually male pirates, but occasionally women, the horror didn't end with death. The body would be placed in an iron cage called a gibbet and hung from the gallows. The law specified the body must remain until 3 tides had washed over it. At Wapping, this meant 36 to 48 hours of public display, the corpse swaying in the wind, gulls circling overhead. As one observer wrote in 1720, the sight of the gibbet with its grim cargo serves as powerful deterrent to those who might otherwise be tempted to piracy. Here's what haunts me about this research. We only know about executions that were documented. Court records, newspaper reports, official logs. How many women were executed without ceremony, without record, in colonial outposts where documentation was sparse? Women of color, indigenous women, enslaved women caught up in piracy. Historian Marcus Rediker estimates that for every documented pirate execution, 2-3 more went unrecorded, especially in Caribbean and African colonial ports. If we apply that ratio to female pirates, the dozen documented executions might represent 30 to 40 actual deaths. Women whose names are lost, whose stories ended on gallows that history forgot to record. Before death, and sometimes instead of it, came the whip. Public flogging was ancient punishment, practiced across cultures for millennia. But in the British colonial system of the 18th century, it became refined theatre, a carefully choreographed display of power and pain. The cat o' nine tails wasn't simply a whip. It was 9 separate cords, each tipped with a knot. When swung with force, these knots could tear flesh from bone. Contemporary physicians documented the injuries. Lacerations, bruising that lasted months, permanent scarring. Some victims never fully recovered use of their back muscles. A ship's doctor in 1735 described the aftermath. The flesh hangs in strips, blood flows freely. The prisoner often loses consciousness by the 20th stroke, but the sentence must be completed. The publicity was the point. Floggings happened at the busiest times in the most public places, market squares, dock areas, prison entrances. Crowds would gather, sometimes hundreds of people. Colonial authorities required it. The punishment only worked if it was witnessed. From a 1718 Jamaican ordinance, all floggings shall be carried out in public view, that the populace might see the wages of crime and be deterred from similar wickedness. For female prisoners, the spectacle took on additional dimensions. They were punished for their crimes, yes, but also for violating gender norms. Colonial observers often commented on this aspect. From a 1722 letter written by a Virginia planter, "The sight of a woman at the post offends nature itself. She has degraded her sex and must be degraded in return." Women were stripped to the waist ostensibly for the practical purpose of accessing the back for flogging, but the humiliation was undeniable. Modesty, considered essential to female virtue, was deliberately violated. While there's no direct record of Bonnie and Red being flogged, multiple sources document their treatment during imprisonment. From the keeper's log at St. Jago prison, the female prisoners are kept in irons day and night. They receive only bread and water. They are denied all comforts afforded to other prisoners. A missionary who visited the prison wrote, "I found them in deplorable condition, bruised and weakened, though they maintain their defiant spirits." The bruising suggests physical punishment, even if not officially documented. While specific records of female pirates being flogged are rare, we have documented cases of women convicted of piracy-adjacent crimes receiving this punishment. Case 1. Port Royal, 1715. An unnamed woman convicted of receiving stolen goods from pirates was sentenced to 20 lashes at the public post and banishment from the colony. The Kingston Daily reported her punishment was carried out before a great crowd, with the woman showing remarkable fortitude. Case 2. Charleston, 1728. Margaret Thompson, convicted of harboring pirates and concealing their booty, received 39 lashes, the biblical number, and 1 year's hard labor. 39 lashes equals 3 times 13, the maximum punishment allowed under biblical law. Modern medical analysis of historical flogging records reveals the permanent damage this punishment inflicted: nerve damage leading to chronic pain, infection, common in tropical climates, scarring that limited mobility, psychological trauma, what we now recognize as PTSD. Of prisoners who received 50 or more lashes, mortality rates within 1 year were approximately 15 to 20%, mostly from infection or complications from the wounds. But flogging and execution weren't the only fates awaiting captured female pirates. Not every captured female pirate faced immediate death. For some, particularly women of color, indigenous women, and those captured in Spanish or Portuguese territories, their punishment was disappearance into systems of slavery and servitude. This aspect of female pirate punishment is the least documented and the most disturbing, precisely because the women who suffered it were deliberately erased from official records. Let me be clear about the historiographical challenge here. We have limited direct evidence that women specifically identified as pirates were forced into slavery after capture. Historical limitation. Records are sparse, incomplete, and biased toward preserving European male narratives. What we do have: general practices of handling captured women in colonial ports, racial and class-based assumptions in colonial legal systems, specific archival references to women from pirate vessels being sold or assigned, pattern analysis of what happened to other captured women in similar circumstances. Historian Chris Lane notes in his 2016 book Pillaging the Empire, women captured aboard vessels engaged in piracy faced outcomes determined less by their actions than by their race, class, and the prejudices of colonial authorities. Spanish and Portuguese colonial law treated piracy differently than British law. While execution was always an option, authorities had broader discretion, especially regarding people they considered property. From the 1681 Recopilación de Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias, Spanish colonial law, persons of African or mixed blood found aboard vessels engaged in piracy may be sold at auction to offset the costs of their capture and trial. The law made explicit distinctions: European women, trial and possible execution; free women of color, trial, possible execution, or enslavement. Enslaved women found on ships returned to slavery regardless of their role. The most concrete evidence comes from Spanish colonial archives in Portobello, Panama, and Cartagena, Colombia, major ports where captured pirates were processed. A 1692 record from Portobello describes the capture of a pirate vessel. Among the prisoners taken were 3 women of mulatto appearance. Having no proof of free status and being unable to provide names of masters, they have been sold at public auction to recover costs. Proceeds, 180 pesos. Unable to provide names of masters, the assumption is automatic. Women of color found on pirate ships must have been enslaved, therefore could be re-enslaved. From Cartagena, 1698, 2 female prisoners from the English pirate vessel. One claims to be free, daughter of a merchant in Kingston. The other admits to being escaped slave. The first is held for trial. The second is sold to Don Miguel de Paredes for 200 pesos. The escaped slave was 19 years old. Her name is not recorded. Historians estimate that 20–30% of pirate crews in the Caribbean included men of African descent, freed slaves, escaped slaves, or freeborn people of color. The percentage of women of color aboard pirate ships is unknown but likely similar. These women faced compounded vulnerability, assumed to be property based on race, subject to colonial laws that gave them few rights, invisible in historical records that prioritized European narratives. Dr. Sawande Amastakim, historian of slavery in the Atlantic world, writes, enslaved women who found themselves aboard pirate vessels, whether by capture, escape, or choice, inhabited a liminal space. If recaptured, the legal system simply absorbed them back into slavery. Their agency, their choices, their very existence as historical actors was denied. Let me walk you through the fragments we can reconstruct. Maria, last name unknown, captured 1706, from a Dutch colonial record in Curaçao. One woman, calling herself Maria, of Negro appearance, found aboard the French pirate vessel La Trompeuse, claims to have been forced aboard against her will from Martinique, without proof of freedom, assigned to work in the governor's household pending investigation. No follow-up record exists. Assigned to work was often permanent. 3 unnamed women, captured 1715, from Jamaica. The pirate sloop taken by HMS Scarborough contained 3 women described as Maroons who had joined the crew voluntarily. The question of their status has been referred to the governor. Maroons were escaped slaves who formed independent communities. If these women were Maroons who chose piracy, their capture meant re-enslavement. The governor's decision is not recorded. The women's fate is unknown. Beyond plantation slavery, captured women faced another fate: forced concubinage and domestic servitude in the households of colonial officials and wealthy merchants. This was rarely documented officially, but we find references in private correspondence. A 1719 letter from a Spanish official in Havana mentions, the captured pirate women, being of suitable appearance and temperament, have been distributed among the households of prominent citizens, where they may be reformed through Christian service and oversight. Suitable appearance, code for young and attractive; Christian service, euphemism for servitude; oversight, implying control without legal protections. What makes this aspect of female pirate punishment so insidious is the deliberate erasure. Unlike executions, which were recorded for their deterrent value, the absorption of women into systems of servitude left no official trace. Consider this: documented female pirate executions, 12 to 15. Documented female pirate trials, 50 to 60. Women estimated to have sailed with pirate crews, 200 to 300 plus. Where did the others go? The answer for many, especially women of color, was into the invisible systems of colonial servitude, plantation slavery, domestic work, concubinage, from which they never emerged, at least not in historical records. In the murky waters off Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Kingston, Jamaica, rotting ships sat at anchor. Their masts were stripped, their sails removed, their purpose transformed from instruments of war to instruments of punishment. These were prison hulks, floating hells, where captured pirates, rebels, and enemies of the crown were left to die slowly, out of sight, out of mind. Prison hulks became widespread in the mid-18th century as a solution to overcrowding. Britain's colonial expansion meant more prisoners, convicted criminals, political prisoners, captured pirates than its prisons could hold. The solution was economically efficient and politically convenient. Take decommissioned warships, strip them of anything valuable, and convert them into floating prisons. No new construction necessary, out of sight of the general public, easy to guard with a skeleton crew. From a 1776 Admiralty report, the hulks provide adequate containment at minimal cost. Their isolated position prevents escape and limits the spread of criminal influence to shore populations. The conditions aboard these ships were designed for slow death, whether intentionally or through negligent indifference. A typical prison hulk held 300 to 400 prisoners in holds designed for storing cargo, not housing humans. No natural light below the waterline, no ventilation beyond small hatches, no sanitation facilities, no medical care, minimal food and water. A 1778 inspection report describes conditions aboard HMS Jersey, a notorious prison hulk in New York. The stench below deck is almost unbearable. The prisoners are chained in rows, unable to move more than a few feet. Many show signs of fever and dysentery. The dead are left among the living until the morning count. The primary killers aboard prison hulks were disease, typhus, spread by lice in cramped, unwashed conditions; dysentery, from contaminated water and lack of sanitation; smallpox, highly contagious in confined spaces; pneumonia, from damp, cold conditions; malnutrition, from inadequate rations. Annual mortality rate on prison hulks, 30 to 40%, higher than on slave ships crossing the Atlantic. Direct documentation of female pirates specifically dying on prison hulks is limited, but we know women were held on these vessels under similar conditions as men. From the log of HMS Success, anchored off Kingston, Jamaica, 1721, female prisoners are kept in the aft hold, separated from the men by wooden partition. currently holding 12 women, including 3 awaiting trial for piracy. Awaiting trial could mean weeks or months in those conditions. Many died before their cases were heard. A 1724 letter from a prison chaplain visiting hulks in Portsmouth. I found among the prisoners 2 women who had sailed with pirates. One was too ill to speak, consumed by fever. The other begged me to record her name, Margaret Dwyer of Cork, so that someone might know her fate. I returned next week to find both had expired. Margaret Dwyer of Cork died 1724. Age unknown. Women on prison hulks faced additional threats beyond disease and starvation. Multiple historical accounts reference sexual exploitation by guards and sailors. A 1729 complaint filed by a Quaker reformer who visited prison hulks. The female prisoners are subject to the basest treatment by the guards, who view them as beyond the protection of law or decency. I witnessed conditions that I dare not describe in explicit terms but which constitute grave moral offences. The reformer's reluctance to be explicit was typical of the era, but the implication is clear. Women prisoners, especially those convicted of immoral crimes like piracy, were considered fair game for abuse. Remarkably, some women attempted to seek legal remedy. A 1732 petition from the hulk at Plymouth. We, the undersigned female prisoners, appeal to the mercy of His Majesty's courts. We are subjected to treatment that even condemned prisoners should not endure. The official response, stamped on the petition. Petition denied. Prisoners convicted of capital crimes have no standing to appeal conditions of confinement. When prisoners died aboard hulks, their bodies were typically buried in unmarked mass graves near the shore. No ceremonies, no individual markers, no records of who they were. Modern archaeological work has uncovered some of these burial sites. In 2009, excavations near the former Portsmouth prison hulk anchorage revealed remains of approximately 200 individuals, including skeletal remains identified as female. Forensic analysis revealed ages ranging from late teens to 40s, evidence of malnutrition and disease, healed fractures consistent with violent life experiences. Some showed signs of shackle wear on ankles and wrists. Lead archaeologist Dr. Helen Wickstead noted, "These weren't criminals who received swift justice. These were people, including women, who died slowly, forgotten, in what can only be described as torture by neglect." What makes the prison hulk system particularly insidious is how efficiently it removed people from the historical record while they were still alive. When someone was executed, it generated paperwork, death warrant, execution confirmation, property disposition, burial record, sometimes. When someone died on a prison hulk, notation in ship's log maybe. No notification to family, no property disposition, no burial record, often not even a name, just female prisoner number 7, documented female pirate executions, 12 to 15. Women who died on prison hulks, unknown, possibly dozens. Ratio of documented to undocumented deaths, possibly 1 to 5 or higher. Their absence from history wasn't accidental, it was policy. As we've traced the fates of captured female pirates through courtrooms, gallows, flogging posts, slave markets and prison hulks, a pattern emerges that's more troubling than any individual punishment. These women were systematically erased from history, not accidentally, not through time's natural decay of records, but through deliberate choices about who deserved to be remembered. The erasure operated on multiple levels. Legal erasure. Women's testimonies were often excluded or summarized dismissively in trial records. Their own accounts of why they turned to piracy, how they survived, what they experienced, discarded as irrelevant or unreliable. Male pirates' trials often included lengthy testimony about their motivations, their careers, their exploits. Female pirates' trials rushed to verdict with minimal testimony recorded. Social erasure. Families often struck women who became pirates from their records. No inheritance, no mention in family Bibles, no burial in family plots. Example, Anne Bonny's father, a wealthy South Carolina merchant, removed all mention of her from his will and family papers after her trial. She existed, then she didn't. Archival erasure. Colonial authorities were selective about what they preserved. Heroic naval victories, carefully documented. Pirates captured and killed, mentioned briefly. Female prisoners' conditions and fates, often omitted entirely. An 18th century archival instruction from the Jamaican Colonial Office. Records of executions should note only the crime and sentence. Details of imprisonment, particularly regarding female prisoners, need not be preserved unless relevant to matters of state. Historiographical erasure. Even when records survived, historians often ignored them. For centuries, piracy history focused exclusively on male pirates. Women were footnotes, if mentioned at all. It wasn't until the late 20th century that historians began seriously researching female pirates and their fates. Marcus Rediker's work in the 1980s and 90s, Joe Stanley's 1995 book Bold in Her Breeches, recent works by historians like Laura Suk Duncombe. The erasure wasn't just historical oversight. It served specific purposes, maintained gender norms. If women who defied conventions simply disappeared, it reinforced the message that such defiance was impossible or unnatural, obscured brutality. By not documenting the full horror of punishments, authorities avoided accountability for their treatment of female prisoners, prevented solidarity. Women couldn't learn from or be inspired by previous female pirates if their stories were erased. Simplified narratives. History prefers simple stories. Women pirates complicated the masculine narrative of the golden age of piracy, but some voices survived despite the erasure. Not many, but enough to remind us what was lost. Graffiti found carved in a prison cell in Port Royal, Jamaica, dating to approximately 1720. Mary Thompson held here, condemned for piracy. I was hungry. I was desperate. I am no worse than the men who starve us. A letter fragment from an unnamed woman, seized by authorities when a pirate ship was captured in 1718. My dearest sister, if you receive this, know that I chose this life freely. Better to die at sea with dignity than starve on land with none. Do not mourn me. I lived more truly in these months than in all my years before. And from Mary Red's trial testimony, one of the few places where a female pirate's voice comes through clearly, I thought I might as well be hanged as starved. I took to piracy because no honest employment could be had. These fragments are all we have, glimpses of lives that the system tried to erase entirely. We began this video with a question. What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom where even the law was written by men who believed piracy was unnatural in a woman? We've traced the answer through 5 grim fates: rigged trials, execution at the dock, public flogging, forced servitude, and slow death on prison ships. But the deeper answer, the one that should disturb us, is that these women never really had a chance because the system was designed not just to punish them, but to erase them. Male pirates were punished for their crimes, female pirates were punished for their crimes and for violating gender norms. They faced what scholars call double deviance, criminal and unfeminine. As historian Joan Druitt notes in her book She Captains, women who went to sea were considered unnatural, women who became pirates were considered monstrous, and monsters, in the eyes of 18th century justice, deserved monstrous punishments. Consider what we don't know. How many women actually sailed with pirate crews? How many were captured? How many were executed without trial? How many died in prison? How many were sold into slavery? How many simply disappeared? Our best estimates suggest 200 to 300 plus women sailed with pirates during the Golden Age. We have detailed records for fewer than 50. The fates of 80 to 90% are completely unknown. That's not history. That's absence. That's void. That's deliberate forgetting. You might think this is just ancient history, irrelevant to our time, but the patterns persist. Women in criminal justice systems still face judgment based on gender conformity. Female prisoners still endure conditions and treatment different from male prisoners. Women who commit unfeminine crimes still face harsher social stigma. The voices of marginalized women are still systematically excluded from historical narratives. Legal scholar Angela Davis writes, "The history of women's punishment reveals how deeply gender norms are embedded in justice systems. We cannot reform these systems without acknowledging their historical foundations." In Portsmouth, England, there's now a small memorial near where the prison hulks were anchored. It reads, "In memory of all who died on the prison hulks, 1776 to 1857. Among them were women whose names we do not know, whose crimes were often poverty or defiance, whose deaths went unrecorded. We remember them now. It's not much, but it's something, an acknowledgement, a refusal to let the erasure be complete. The women who sailed under the black flag, whether by choice, by force, or by desperation, deserve more than footnotes and legends. They deserve to be understood as complex human beings navigating impossible circumstances. Anne Bonny, Mary Red, Mary Critchett, Rachel Wall, Margaret Dwyer, Maria, Mary Thompson, and the hundreds whose names we'll never know. They faced systems designed to punish and erase them. They resisted, survived, and sometimes died, but they existed, they acted, they chose, and that matters. As Margaret Atwood wrote, "In the end we'll all become stories, make yours a good one." For the female pirates, we've tried to erase their stories entirely. This video is a small attempt to bring them back, not romanticized, not sanitized, but real as we can make them with the fragments that survived the systematic erasure. Thank you for watching this examination of one of history's darkest chapters. If this video affected you, I've included resources in the description for understanding historical trauma and its modern echoes. Subscribe to The Hollow Throne for more investigations into the stories history tried to bury. Share this video if you believe these women deserve to be remembered, and I want to hear from you. What does the systematic erasure of female pirates tell us about how history gets written? Who else has been written out of the historical record? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll leave you with this thought from historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. Well-behaved women seldom make history, but when they do, their stories are often erased. These women didn't behave. Their stories were erased, but not completely, not while we remember them. Until next time, this has been The Hollow Throne, where we refuse to let the powerful bury the voices of the powerless.